Hey y'all, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
You are very, very welcome to our continued coverage on the Colonizer's World Tour. If you don't know us, we're two doctors. We have degrees in social science that focus on a whole lot of things, but basically what we've learned to do is analyze cultures, and we love to do that and talk about them. And we mean big cultures, small cultures, all around the world, lived in pop varieties, pretty much anything. We will look at it through our social science lens. And we do this for the purpose of educating folks about how to live their lives in a way that is empathetic and inclusive. And from the small things of, our favorite LGBTQ media outlets and stories that we know and how they've built empathy and inclusivity and how we understand the beautiful rainbow of humanity, to maybe why we should be talking more about diversity shape and body shape diversity, I should say, in shows like Bridgerton and lots of other shows, TBH. We cover all of this stuff. We love to talk about it with each other. We talk about it on recording devices so that we can share our thoughts and feelings and have conversations with you wonderful humans. So please make sure that you do the things that you can on the service that you're on. Like and subscribe, share, tell your friends. We want to hear from you, so make sure and comment below with whatever we are discussing and whatever you would like to share with us.
This video is about the Philippines. So we'll get into that in a minute. But the reason we're talking about it as part of our Colonizers World Tour is that we're spending the month of June focusing on global queer stories. And one of the ones that has made headlines a lot in the United States over the last couple of years was Joseph Pemberton, Private First Class, I think is his rank. Joseph Pemberton, who was a U.S. Marine stationed in the Philippines, murdered a Filipino trans sex worker named Jennifer Laude back in 2013, I believe it was. And we're going to be talking about tomorrow here on the channel, a review of the documentary that was made about the coverage of that case and the case in general, and kind of the relationship of the American military to the Filipino courts and kind of what that looks like. But before we could talk about that, we had to talk about some of the basics of life in the Philippines. And so we do this every week. It's a 101 video of just here's the whistle stop tour of things you should know before you dive into another piece of art. And so that's what today is. As is our custom, we like to upfront let you know what we knew about the place before we started learning about it. And so, Dr. Erin, what did you know about the Philippines before we started chatting?
Yeah, not a lot, everybody. This will shock you. As if you followed us on our stops around Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, is not a region in which I had studied or read a lot about. So I usually used to get it confused with Indonesia only in terms of geography. Like if you showed me a map, I wasn't sure which one was the Philippines and which one was Indonesia.
Yeah.
I learned through previous installments of our Colonizers World Tour that we got it as a part of the United States, took over control of the Philippines at the end of the Spanish-American War. I learned that when we covered Guam last month, because we also got Guam in that deal. We were just colonizing all over the islands. That is all I knew, though, literally it. So, I had heard of their current president, Duterte. So when he came up a lot, I was like, oh yeah, but I couldn't have told you much. What about yourself? What did you know?
I knew about the Spanish-American War thing. I think it was a question on my AP US history exam, was to do with the Philippines, because it's one of those, like, I've always known that we owned it and we got it from during the Spanish-American War, but I can't tell you how or why. So it had to have been my US, because the year I did the US AP US exam was a lot about imperialism and colonization. So I think that was the focus of the exam that year. So I think that's where I learned it. I've also just had the privilege of crossing paths with a lot of Filipino American folks throughout college and grad school, especially. And so heard little bits and bobs from here. I know about lumpia, which is one of their loved dishes. And I'm a deep fan of something that you wrap in dough, fry it on some level, and call it food. So lumpia is like right up there with me. Big lumpia fan. And I knew that flan was a really big deal because there is a book I read once where they were trying to do a food truck in Manila entirely making flan and figured out that you really can't make flan in a food truck. And besides that, as always in this part of the world, I'm sure the Amazing Race has been in Manila a few times and I picked
loads of times.
But like nothing to this extent. And so I'm really glad that we had this opportunity to dive deep a little bit, especially because being an American in the last couple of years means you've heard the name Duterte because he and President Trump had a bit of a mutual admiration society going on. And so, he is a very internationally controversial president and internally controversial president, as we have learned. And so it was good to spend a little bit of time diving in. So before we kind of get into some of the more meaty social issues going around and what we've learned, let's blow through some of these demographics, shall we?
Yes, let's go to the map.
So where is it? Obviously, it's near Indonesia. If Dr. Erin used to geographically confuse the two, it's in Southeast Asia. It's an archipelago, like all of these are, between the Philippine Sea and the South China Sea. It's kind of east of Vietnam. It is slightly larger than the state of Arizona and has 7,000 islands, only 2,000 of which are inhabited. The population in July 2020-ish, or now, around now, is 110 million. But most importantly, they've got about 10 million folks overseas. They have one of the largest diasporas of any continent, which is of any culture, which is a really big deal because the diaspora of any nation has a huge part of then kind of how that nation interacts with other nations, and then also kind of what they bring home and how they do things. You can see the Israeli the Jewish diaspora, the Irish diaspora are two other very large ones to be looking at. The cities, the capital is Manila. The other thing I just realized is that I've heard of the Thrilla in Manila.
Oh yeah, was that a fight?
It was a fight, yeah.
A boxing fight with Muhammad Ali?
Yeah. So that's something else I realized I have heard of.
I had heard of it, although I clearly didn't remember it enough to put it on my list.
No, yeah. As soon as I said Manila, I was like, the Thrilla in Manila, yeah.
Hey.
There are 186 individual languages in the Philippines, but they have two official ones, which is English and how I say it is Tagalog, because that's how my friends in India say it, but that is not how I've heard other folks say it. So, but it is, it's Filipino is kind of that with a little bit more Spanish thrown in and like flattened in all of that. Like it's kind of shoved a lot of the different dialects together. When you listen to, like when I was watching the documentary Call Her Ganda, it is like every sentence had at least 3 English words in it, and they kept like code switching and flipping back and forth. So, but it sounded a lot like Spanish to my ear. And so there's a lot of delightful mess there. Just as many languages, just like there are many languages, there's 175 ethnic groups. And they are, all sorts of derivatives and combinations of folks and combinations of cultures. The currency is the Filipino peso, which currently in June of 2021, as we are filming this, $1 is approximately 48 Filipino pesos. So you're kind of in that range at this moment. Government. This is where we get a little bit into Duterte. So it's a republic. It's a presidential republic with 81 provinces. There's a mixed kind of system of civil, common, and customary law. And there's a couple places where Sharia law is used and enforced. The president right now, as we've said, is Rodrigo Duterte. And he has very, very publicly and for a long time been fighting what he calls a war on drugs. And his way to fight that war on drugs is largely through killing people that they think are involved in the war on drugs. Many people have accused him of killing political opponents under the guise of a war on drugs. Within the country of the Philippines, he is statistically popular, and this is often a statistically popular route of action that he has used, but he has his detractors, both in the global human rights stage. Human Rights Watch, not a big fan. Amnesty International, not a big fan. And there are definitely people within the Philippines that are massively, massively against him and would like to see him never elected again. So controversial guy, but you need to remember, just like a lot of other places with controversial figures, there is homegrown support. And so it's not a simple situation. The US and the EU have both declared it a rapidly deteriorating human rights situation. So, but just a little bit on the nose, we have some hand in that, in how we've set up the colonial history. So we should kind of always think about that. Now, really quick, hi, religion scholar here. Philippines is freaking Catholic, like really, really Catholic. It is the largest Christian nation in Asia. It is the 5th largest Christian nation in the world, and is the 3rd largest Catholic adherents in the world, behind Brazil and Mexico, respectively. Massively, massively culturally Catholic, as well as devoutly Catholic. They still have very high church attendance and the importance of religious markers. First communion and baptism and confirmation are big markers still in a lot of Filipino lives. And that includes when you are in the diaspora as well. So that the religion has transmitted with the diaspora, which is not always the case. But it definitely is within the Philippines. So Dr. Erin, we've done the whirlwind whistle stop tour of the basics.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about the Philippines.
Yes. So their economy is newly industrialized. It's transitioning out of agricultural to service and industry based. A lot of tech production is happening in the Philippines these days. The education, 98% of the population is defined as literate, and they have compulsory education through grade 12. And then we get to some gender demographics, which is where things got a little interesting in my Google searching. So I'll get to that. But the Philippines is an ethnically diverse country. The median age is around 24, so it's very young. 47% live in urban areas. Otherwise, the population is concentrated where good farmlands lie.
Okay.
As of 2017, 65% of Filipino women did not use contraceptives. There's a lot of reasons for this. Some of it is the Catholicism of it all, although the government has started initiatives to educate women about the use and availability of contraceptives. There is a lingering perception that they have negative side effects, and there is also, combined with a lack of sex education and fear of asking parents or guardians for supports, has led to a high level of teenage pregnancies. And we have some links in the Google Docs to some videos and articles that we found relating to that. They do not have the availability of emergency contraceptives. Abortion is not safe or legal. And there are a lot of abortions happening in the Philippines every year. 3 women die on average every day because of unsafe abortions. So it is not a great situation in terms of safe and legal access to contraceptions and family planning, although they are working on it, especially in a lot of the hardest hit areas. It is listed as one of the most gender equal countries in the world, but there has been a lot of criticism about what Duterte is and isn't doing around maintaining that. It is not too short to say that he has normalized sexism and misogyny in a lot of his speeches.
He's definitely normalized the rhetoric.
Rhetoric around it, yes. And you can find quotes from his speeches that will show that.
Real easily.
Really, really easily. We have a great documentary below by a Filipino journalist for a Singapore news agency that goes into kind of what women's rights look like in Duterte in a very expansive, covering pros and cons way. So make sure you watch that. When I searched for, I'm not the best searcher, I should say this, folks. Dr. Kristen is a lot better at it intuitively. So I typed into YouTube, women in the Philippines, because I thought something would come up, about women's lives in the Philippines. No, friends. What I in fact got was pages and pages of videos about how to impress Philippine women on dates, what Filipino women look for in relationships, lots about the 10 like best dating tips for dating Filipino women. So to say that Filipino women outside, probably inside the Philippines, but definitely outside the Philippines, have been hypersexualized is an understatement. Um, in terms of queer life, the country is ranked 10th most gay friendly nation in a 2020 survey. Again, young Filipinos a lot more accepting of queer lifestyle, sexuality, and gender differences. Very similar to all the other colonized nations we've looked at. Prior to Spanish occupation, homosexual individuals existed in Filipino society. There's a personage called the Babaylan, which are traditionally feminine shamans of the animistic religions. But a lot of times men who dressed and behaved as women or effeminate were also babalans. They functioned as healers, mediators, and highly respected spiritual leaders of the communities. Again, when you bring in Christianity and Islam to the Philippine region, we get a lot more strict understandings of gender and sexuality. Same-sex sexual activity is not a crime in the Philippines, but conduct or affection that occurs in public may be subject to the grave scandal prohibition in the penal code.
Cool.
Sit with that for a second. They do not offer legal recognitions to same-sex marriage, civil unions, or domestic partnerships. So where the statistic that it's one of the most gay-friendly nations is really interesting that comes into some global surveys. So on to colonization, which is always what we finish with before we talk about what we learned.
Two major players here.
The Spanish and the Americans. The Spanish were expanding their colonial projects, colonizing all over the East. And that's where we get Magellan and other explorers with the Spanish flag encountering a lot of uncharted territories. So they eventually designate, as we said, the Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands. They eventually designate a very broad geographical expanse of these islands into a single colony called Las Islas Filipinas. By the mid 1500s, we get the first borders of the future Philippine state. So the Spanish are there for a long, long time. We start to see a late 19th century growing independence movement of indigenous Filipinos. There was a Philippine Revolution in 1896. And then by 1898, the Spanish were fighting both the Filipinos in the Philippines and the Americans in the Spanish-American War. They lost the Spanish-American War, in part because we also helped out in the Philippines because we're just so kind that way. Sarcasm noted. So the Spanish agreed to sell us the Philippines for 20 million US dollars. We had an anti-imperialist movement in the United States at that time that was opposed to the annexation, and the Filipinos didn't really want it. So then we had a Filipino-American War, which lasted until 1902 and saw the death of 4,000 Americans and 16,000 Filipino soldiers, as well as almost 1 million civilians from hunger and disease. Great job, Americans, making things better everywhere we colonized. We then implemented, according to President McKinley, a policy of benevolent assimilation, which is,
it's what we did everywhere. We didn't call it that except when he did. So in a way, thanks for saying the quiet thing out loud.
Yeah. With the promise that we would take over and help them move towards self-rule. But we were real slow on the uptake of that because of their resources and the strategic location in Southeast Asia, as per our usuals. We use the country as a military base. We like to do that.
And tomorrow's video gets a whole lot more into the current relationship between the US military and the Filipino government, again, as I said, and talks about the specific legal wrangling of what that looks like. So definitely tune in tomorrow if you're interested in what current relationships look like.
It is fascinating. We brought a lot of cultural change with the US occupation. The Salvation Army, the YMCA, the Lions Club, the Kiwanis, and the Rotary all became very big in the Philippines. We did designate in 1935 them as a commonwealth and establish a Philippine government that was meant to transition to full independence. But you history wonks out there will know by 1935, we were real close to the Second World War, which then happened. And then we get the Japanning all over Southeast Asia. They occupied the islands from 1941 to 1945 and were horrible. Killed between 500,000 and a million Filipinos during their occupation. We joined in to help in 1945 in the Battle of Manila, which led to the end of the occupation. And then we get, by 1946, the establishment of the Republic of the Philippines. So that's where we get this fascinating mixture in the Tagalog language of Spanish and American and Filipino ethnic diversity on all those islands. And thus, the colonization continues to impact. As we said, tomorrow we'll be talking about the military colonization of the Philippines and our continued presence there militarily, which was a big part of what we talked about on Guam as well. So, Dr. Kristen, as we finish up, what is the thing you want to talk about that you learned about the Philippines?
That the first patent for a karaoke machine was made by a Filipino gentleman, and that they really love karaoke, because I also really love karaoke.
They love karaoke.
So that made me really happy. Also watched a bunch of street food videos, and I just would like to go to Manila yesterday and eat my way through it. So, but for me, like that, because you just hear that Japan invented karaoke. So a Japanese guy evidently invented the machine, but the first patent went to this Filipino dude, and I love that. What about you?
I learned also something delightful, especially given that history of all the things that did not go well in the Philippines. They have one of the longest Christmas celebrations in the world.
Yeah, it's like 4 months, isn't it?
It is. It's called the Ber tradition for the Ber months, the months that end in BER. So it goes from September to the Epiphany in January, the Feast of the Epiphany. And it is all about family and togetherness and celebration. They use this time to plan trips home, to save for gifts. We talked about the overseas workers and the diasporic population of Filipinos. Many of them, if they come home at all every year, they come home for Christmas. So it's this huge cultural celebration of togetherness, and it's a big part of the culture. And we have a couple links on the Google Doc to Christmas celebrations and just how big they are in the Philippines. But of all the surprising things we've learned, that might be one of my favorites on this Colonizers World Tour. I was like, why not? Why not have a 4-month Christmas celebration?
I mean, we do too. We just only have 4 months of the commercialization of Christmas. So I would love the idea of 4 months of the good stuff of Christmas.
Of the good stuff, yeah.
Can you imagine the sheer amount of Hallmark movies in 4 months?
Oh my gosh.
Or just holiday movies. I mean, was it last year? Like, we watched one on BET, for crying out loud. Like, they're taking over everything.
We did. They're taking over everything, every holiday. There's definitely Hallmark's doing Jewish ones. So they're doing Hanukkah.
So it's Lifetime.
We need a Kwanzaa one. Come on, Hallmark.
We also need more we need more rom-coms. But in response to our lovely editor Eleanor's Pleas to the Universe, we need more queer rom-coms that aren't holiday centric as well.
Yeah. So what I would love to see, tying this all together, is a Hallmark movie about Christmas in the Philippines, 1, or 2, Filipino filmmakers, let's start making some holiday rom-coms.
Start making food-based rom-coms, I would also be here for. Y'all have so much food.
Let's get some intersections on here and start celebrating some of the awesomeness of Filipino culture.
I love it.
Let's do it.
Tomorrow, like we said, we'll see you for a discussion about some of the messier, more annoying if you're an American, and I'm sure even a stronger word than that if you're Filipino, aspects of the American-Filipino relationship. And until then, per usual, If you are Filipino, Filipino American, Filipino hyphen something else, and would like to tell us about resources we didn't get a chance to find or things that we can learn, we love, love, love learning. So please don't hesitate to kindly educate us about things that we need to know because we're always looking for more.
We will see you whenever we see you next. Take care, everybody.
Bye.